People like to say they're not afraid of anything until they stand face to face with fear. I thought I was one of those people. We all did. It's funny, really, how easy it is to laugh at ghost stories when you're huddled around a fire, beer in hand, surrounded by your best friends. You feel invincible. But out there, deep in Yosemite, beneath the shadow of those cliffs and trees so old they seem alive, it's a different story. I used to scoff at those tales about the kid who drowned in the lake by Chilnualna Falls, the one whose cries echo through the trees. I didn't believe a word of it. Neither did Matt, Jake, or Emily. We thought we'd document it, capture it all on film. That was the plan, at least. I'm not sure what we captured now. I haven't watched the footage. I can't. Maybe I will one day. But then again, maybe not. Yosemite was supposed to be a break for us, a final summer escape before the real world started creeping in. Matt had just landed a job in San Francisco. Emily was going back to grad school, and Jake and I were still figuring it out. It was going to be just one last trip before life split us apart. The idea came from Jake, always the joker, always the one pushing boundaries. "We should make a documentary," he'd said. "Like, really dig into the weird stuff. There's that ghost story about Chilnualna Falls, right? Let's film it. Make something creepy." Emily had laughed. She loved ghost stories but never believed in them. Matt, who took everything too seriously, shrugged. Sure, why not? I could use the distraction. That's how we found ourselves on the Chilnualna Falls trail, armed with cameras, sound equipment, and enough bravado to think we'd capture something other people hadn't. The hike wasn't hard, but the deeper we got into the woods, the quieter things became. That's what I remember most about the start. The silence. Nature sounds should have been everywhere. Birds, wind rustling through the trees, the sound of our boots crunching on gravel. But all I could hear was the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, or the soft whir of Jake's camera. The world seemed to hold its breath the closer we got to the falls. "Are we sure this is the right way?" Emily asked. Her voice felt loud against the stillness. Matt checked his GPS. "Yeah, we're on track. The lake isn't far. We'll set up camp near it." There was something off about the air. It wasn't just the quiet, but the way the forest pressed in on us, dark even in the late afternoon sun. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, but I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to be the first to admit I was uncomfortable. Besides, Jake seemed thrilled, holding his camera up to film every tree, every shadow. The boys' cries were supposed to start near the falls. That's what the stories said anyway. The legend went that anyone who tried to help him drowned in the lake, the same way he did. But we didn't believe in ghosts, and that was our downfall. When we reached the lake, we set up camp. The sky was growing dark, the sun dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the water. I remember staring at the lake's surface, dark and still, like a mirror waiting to be broken. It was beautiful in a way that felt wrong, like something that shouldn't be touched. I couldn't explain why, but I didn't want to get too close. Jake and Matt set up the cameras while Emily unpacked the gear. The plan was simple: record the night, document everything. If we heard the cries, great. If not, we'd still have footage of a beautiful camping trip. What could go wrong? As night fell, the temperature dropped fast. The fire we built did little to chase away the cold. We gathered around it, passing a bottle of whiskey between us, trying to shake off the growing tension. "Maybe the boy doesn't cry for skeptics," Emily joked, but her laugh didn't quite reach her eyes. Hours passed. We were tired, cold, and ready to call it a night when Jake stood up suddenly, the camera still in his hands. "Did you hear that?" We all froze. At first, there was nothing, just the crackle of the fire and the soft lapping of water against the shore. But then, faintly, it came. The sound of crying, distant and weak, carried on the breeze. Matt swore under his breath. Emily looked at me wide-eyed, waiting for me to laugh it off, but I couldn't. The hair on my neck stood up. "That's not funny," she said. "You guys are messing with me." But it wasn't a joke. The crying got louder, clearer. a child sobbing, desperate and scared, like he was lost in the woods and couldn't find his way. My chest tightened. I felt like I couldn't breathe, my throat closing up. "Jesus, it's real," Jake whispered, lowering his camera. Matt turned to me, his face pale. "What do we do?" I didn't know. I couldn't think. We just stood there, the four of us, staring into the darkness where the cries seemed to come from, waiting for something to happen. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the crying stopped. Silence rushed back in, even heavier than before. The air felt thicker, colder. "That's it?" Jake asked, breaking the stillness. "Just crying? What a letdown." But something had shifted. I could feel it, deep in my gut, like the air itself was watching us. I wanted to leave, but we couldn't just pack up and go in the dark. That's when Matt suggested we hike back to the falls in the morning, get some footage near the water. I didn't argue. I didn't trust my voice. Morning came, but it didn't bring relief. We hiked to the falls, the same quiet lingering in the trees, and set up our equipment. The falls were loud, crashing against the rocks, drowning out any other sounds. It felt safer there, like the noise was a barrier between us and whatever had happened the night before. Jake, always the bravest, or the stupidest, decided to climb down to the water's edge, his camera rolling the whole time. "Just a quick dip for the shot," he called over the roar of the falls, grinning like an idiot. But when his foot slipped, it wasn't a joke anymore. He fell hard, disappearing beneath the water. The next few moments felt like they stretched into an eternity. One second, Jake was standing at the water's edge, smirking at us. The next, he was gone, swallowed by the crashing water as if the falls themselves had claimed him. "Jake!" Emily screamed, her voice breaking through the noise. Matt bolted toward the rocks, trying to find a path down, but the jagged ledges made it impossible to follow quickly. I stood there, frozen, my mind refusing to catch up with what my eyes had just seen. It couldn't be real. It couldn't. By the time Matt reached the water's edge, Jake was still gone. No flailing arms, no splashes, just the relentless pounding of the falls against the rocks. "Do something!" Emily shouted at me, her face pale and wild with panic. I scrambled forward, but Matt was already wading into the water, looking around frantically. The current was too strong, even near the shore. It was like watching him fight against something much larger than just the water. He called out Jake's name again and again, but there was no answer. Emily started crying, her hands shaking as she gripped my arm. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if there was anything we could do. My mind was racing, caught between disbelief and terror, and I felt completely helpless. And then finally, Matt gave up. He came back to us, soaked and exhausted, shaking his head. "He's gone," he muttered, his voice breaking. I couldn't see him anywhere. "No," Emily whimpered. "No, this isn't happening. It's a joke, right? He's just messing with us." But deep down, we all knew it wasn't. Jake was gone, swallowed by the falls. We stood there in shock, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest, I thought I might pass out. Emily kept mumbling, "This isn't real. This can't be real," over and over again, her hands trembling against her face. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't even recognize it. I felt like I was outside of myself, watching this nightmare unfold from somewhere far away. Matt just shook his head again, his face pale, his eyes hollow. "We need to go. We need to get help." But help felt like an impossible concept, like something too far removed from us. We were isolated, hours from civilization, and the trail back felt impossibly long. The thought of leaving Jake behind, of walking away from that place where we'd lost him, felt wrong. But what else could we do? Emily refused to move at first. She kept saying we needed to find him, that maybe he was still there, trapped under the water, waiting for us to help him. It took both Matt and me to pull her away from the rocks, her sobs echoing against the falls as we dragged her back to the trail. The walk back was worse than the night before. None of us spoke much. The silence pressed in on us again, thicker than ever, the forest closing in like a dark tunnel with no end. Emily kept muttering under her breath, her face streaked with tears, while Matt led the way, moving too fast as if he was trying to outrun the reality of what had happened. But as we moved, something started to change. The trail didn't feel the same. The trees, the rocks, the path. It all seemed off, like we were walking in circles, trapped in some nightmarish loop. No matter how far we went, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't getting any closer to leaving. The woods felt endless, suffocating, like they were bending around us. At some point, Matt stopped suddenly, turning around with a look in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear, pure and raw. "Does it feel different to you?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What do you mean?" I tried to keep calm, but my own nerves were shot. "This place," he said, gesturing around. "It's not the same. We're not getting out." Emily stopped walking, staring at Matt like he'd lost it. "What are you talking about? We just need to keep going. Just keep walking." But deep down, I felt it too. The path seemed wrong, the trees looming closer, the sky darkening even though it wasn't late enough for the sun to be setting. It was like the world itself was shifting, twisting in ways I couldn't understand. "I think we need to turn around," Matt said, his voice strained. Maybe we took a wrong turn." "That's impossible," Emily snapped. "We've been on the same trail. There's no way we messed up." But Matt wouldn't listen. He turned back the way we came, ignoring Emily's protests, and started walking. I didn't know what else to do but follow him, even though every step felt heavier, like the air was thickening around us. We walked for what felt like hours. The sun was sinking fast now, the light fading through the trees, casting long shadows that moved like they had a life of their own. The trail twisted and turned, but it never seemed to lead anywhere. It was like we were trapped in the same stretch of forest, looping back over the same ground again and again. I don't know how long we wandered like that. Time seemed to blur, lost in the growing darkness. Emily was sobbing openly now, her breaths ragged and broken. Matt's face was blank, his eyes wide and distant. Then suddenly he stopped dead in his tracks. I almost ran into him, and when I looked ahead, my stomach dropped. We were back at the lake. The same lake where Jake had disappeared. Something snapped in me then. I don't remember screaming, but I must have because my throat was raw. Emily collapsed to the ground wailing, while Matt just stood there, staring at the water, his hands shaking violently. "This can't be real," he whispered, barely audible over Emily's sobs. "This isn't possible." It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But there we were, standing on the shore of the same lake, the water dark and still, reflecting the last fading light of the day. It was like we'd been pulled back, like something had dragged us here. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my head spinning. I backed away from the water, my legs unsteady, but Matt just stood there, staring into the depths like he was hypnotized. "I'm going in," he muttered, his voice flat. "No," I said, my voice cracking. "Matt, don't." But he didn't listen. He took a step forward, and before I could stop him, he was wading into the lake, his movements slow and deliberate like he was in a trance. "Matt, stop!" I yelled, grabbing his arm, but he yanked it free, pushing me away with surprising strength. "I have to," he said, his eyes glassy. "I have to find him." "No, you don't," I shouted, panic rising in my chest. "He's gone, Matt. We need to leave. Now." But Matt was gone. He plunged into the water, disappearing beneath the surface just like Jake had. I screamed for him. I screamed until my throat felt like it was tearing apart. But he didn't come back up. And then it was just me and Emily, standing alone on the shore of that cursed lake. We never found Matt or Jake. I don't know what happened to them, and I don't want to know. It took me hours to pull Emily away from the lake, hours to convince her to leave with me. By the time we found our way back to the main trail, it was morning. We stumbled into the ranger station like ghosts ourselves, half crazed, rambling about what had happened. No one believed us, of course. They said it was an accident, that Jake and Matt had drowned, and we were lucky to have made it out. But I know better.